because Alexander Devontae Dickey, who was arrested 39 times, 25 felonies, was on the street.
That was the father of 22-year-old Logan Federico, his voice trembling with anger and disbelief over what the justice system allowed to happen to his daughter. Despite nearly 40 arrests and more than 25 felony charges, 30-year-old Alexander Dickey was still walking free when he broke into the South Carolina home where Logan Federico was sleeping. He dragged her naked from her bed in the dark and forced her onto her knees on the floor. With a stolen 12-gauge shotgun pressed to her chest, he pulled the trigger at point-blank range, killing her instantly, execution style. Logan's father said he had to live with the knowledge that his daughter's killer, a man who had cycled in and out of prison dozens of times, should have been locked away permanently long before he was given the chance to carry out such a monstrous act. In the summer of 2025, Jordan Peterson nearly died after developing pneumonia and sepsis that left him in the ICU for weeks. His daughter later revealed that the illness began after he was exposed to heavy mold while cleaning out his late father's basement, triggering what she called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, a rare and unofficial life-threatening immune condition. He reportedly suffered nerve damage, extreme sensitivities to medication, and even paralysis. It wasn't the first time Peterson's health had spiraled. Years earlier, he'd endured a near-fatal benzodiazepine withdrawal that required months of treatment abroad. This latest crisis left him bedridden and fighting for his life once again, with his daughter saying that for days, doctors weren't sure if he'd survive. Now, months later, Peterson is slowly recovering. He's reportedly regained much of his mobility, is speaking and reading again, and continues intensive physical therapy from home. His daughter says he's still very fragile but improving daily, though his public appearances, lectures, and recordings remain on hold as he focuses on regaining full strength after what she called the closest he's ever been to dying. This photo shows 23-year-old Jaleel Smith Riley breaking down in tears as he receives a life without parole sentence in a Cincinnati courtroom for the 2013 fatal shooting of 22-year-old Portia Brooks during a botched car robbery. He had attempted to retract his guilty plea and expressed remorse, but the judge denied both motions, citing the brutality of the crime. In the courtroom, the victim's mother held her daughter's ashes, while her sister said the sentence was the only just outcome for the loss inflicted on her family. At age 21 in 1974, Robert Maudsley strangled John Farrell to death after Farrell showed him photos of abused children. He then turned himself in and went on to kill a convicted child molester at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, and in 1978 murdered 2 more predatory cellmates in a single afternoon, coldly telling the guards there will be 2 short on the roll call. Deemed too dangerous even for high-security inmates, in 1983, authorities locked him in a Hannibal Lecter-like glass cage in the basement of an English prison. He typically spends 23 of every 24 hours alone there with no contact with other prisoners. By 2023, he had spent a record 16,000 days in solitary and will likely remain in isolation for the rest of his life. This was the moment when a typical news broadcast turned into an outright nightmare for CBS reporter Lara Logan. On the night of February 11, 2011, as Egypt erupted in celebration over the resignation of their president, Lara Logan was in Cairo documenting the historic moment with her CBS crew for more than an hour, until their camera battery suddenly died and they stopped to regroup. Her local translator then heard the crowd say things like, "Let's take her pants off," and a night of celebration quickly turned into pure terror for the journalist. Suddenly separated from her bodyguards and translators, Logan was swallowed by a crowd of 200 to 300 men who suddenly turned on her in a violent sexual assault. Her clothes were torn, she was dragged, beaten, and by her account, raped with their hands while others filmed on cell phones. She struggled to breathe as her ribcage was compressed and her limbs went numb, convinced she was gonna die. After about 30 minutes, a group of Egyptian women and 24 soldiers forced their way into the mob and carried her away. Logan was hospitalized, flown home the next day, and later went public to break the silence about mass sexual assaults in protest crowds and the risks constantly faced by women in volatile environments of men. In January of 2015, a walker passing through Squirrelwood Scout Camp near Doncaster, England, stumbled upon a sight so grimly bizarre that it made national headlines. Wedged headfirst in a rabbit hole was the body of 50-year-old Stephen Winfrey, a local hunter who had gone missing the day before after taking his dog out to catch rabbits. Investigators pieced together that Winfrey likely tried to reach into the burrow to grab his prey when his torso became trapped at an angle so tight he couldn't breathe or pull himself free. He eventually suffocated in the confined space, his legs still sticking out of the earth as if frozen mid-stride. When rescuers found him, his body was so firmly wedged that it took hours to dislodge, and soil had compacted around his face like a coffin of dirt. His loyal dog was found alive tied to a nearby tree but was trembling and dehydrated, having watched helplessly as its owner got stuck and slowly ran out of air. The coroner ruled his horrifying death an accidental asphyxiation. In 2010, 7-year-old Ayanna Stanley Jones was sleeping on her grandmother's couch in Detroit when a police raid quickly turned deadly. Officers were filming for the A&E show The First 48 as they stormed the home in search of a murder suspect, tossing in a flash grenade before bursting through the door. Within seconds, a bullet fired by Officer Joseph Weekly struck Ayanna in the head, killing her instantly. The officer claimed the gun discharged accidentally after a struggle, but witnesses said he just fired blindly into the darkened home. No one was ever convicted for her death. Ayanna would have turned 25 this year, a haunting reminder of how a child's life was tragically cut short in a moment meant for TV. In the early 1980s, South Korean photographer Lee Dong-sik was convicted of murdering a woman just so he could photograph her dying. Reports from a Korean newspaper say he met the victim, gave her a drink laced with potassium cyanide, and took more than 20 photographs as she slowly died in agony. During questioning, he claimed he wanted to capture the moment of death as part of his art. He was soon arrested, charged with her murder, and executed 4 years later. This was the tragic moment when just a single pitch pushed an MLB player to suicide. On October 12, 1986, Angels relief pitcher Donnie Moore was just one strike away from sending his team to the World Series when he gave up a devastating home run to Boston's Dave Henderson in Game 5 of the ALCS. The Angels went on to lose the game, the series, and fans never forgave him. Even though the loss wasn't entirely his fault, Moore became the public scapegoat. He was relentlessly booed, received hate mail and death threats, and was blamed for cursing the team. The moment single-handedly destroyed his career and mental health. He spiraled into depression, injuries, alcoholism, and financial stress. For years, he lived with the unbearable guilt of that one pitch, famously saying, "I relive it every day." In July of 1989, consumed with anger and despair, he shot his wife during an argument, then turned the gun on himself in front of one of their children. His wife survived, but Moore died at just 35 years old. One of the most tragic examples of how a single moment in sports can lead to a real-life nightmare. In 1993, 16-year-old Marie Robard seemed like the perfect student, quiet, polite, straight A's, and deeply trusted by her single father, Stephen. They lived alone together, and friends said she appeared mature and responsible, even helping to care for him. But beneath the surface, Marie was quietly angry about one thing, a custody ruling that forced her to live with her dad instead of her mother. She grew more distant over time, secretly obsessing over how to change her situation. Then one night, her father suddenly collapsed in excruciating pain and died just hours later. Doctors believed it was a heart attack, and Marie played the role of a heartbroken daughter so well that nobody suspected a thing. Life moved on. Over a year passed before a friend came forward with a chilling confession. Marie had stolen barium acetate from her school's chemistry lab and mixed it into her dad's refried beans, calmly poisoning him just so she could live somewhere else. Investigators exhumed the body, confirmed the toxin, and charged her with murder. She was charged as an adult, convicted, and sentenced to 28 years in prison. But in a shocking twist, the honors student killer was paroled after just 7 years, walking free before she even turned 30. Michael J. Fox was at the peak of his career when his life quietly turned into a tragedy. While filming Doc Hollywood at just 29 years old, he was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease, something doctors typically only see in elderly patients. He was so young that he thought the diagnosis had to be a mistake, but when specialists confirmed it, he went home, stared at the wall, and quickly fell into a deep depression, drinking heavily and hiding the truth from everyone for years, even his castmates. As the disease slowly destroyed his body, the world had no idea that while he was smiling and cracking jokes on the sitcom Spin City, his hand was shaking uncontrollably off camera. Directors had to constantly hide his symptoms by forcing him to sit during scenes or hold props with both hands. But Parkinson's didn't just steal his movement, it came with the threat of dementia, hallucination, and total loss of independence, a slow countdown he could do nothing to stop. Fox has since shattered bones from violent falls, undergone risky spinal surgery, and admitted that every day he wakes up with less control than the day before. A once energetic Back to the Future star has spent over 30 years watching himself fade in slow motion, and he said the moment he was diagnosed, "I felt my future get sucked out of the room." But instead of giving up, Michael turned his pain into purpose, founding the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which has now raised over $2 billion for Parkinson's research, making it the largest nonprofit funder of the disease in history by far. Despite losing control of his body, Fox might be the reason millions of others one day get theirs back. At just 8 years old, future UFC champion Ronda Rousey lived through a nightmare most fans never hear about. Her father, Ron Rousey, suffered a brutal sledding accident that shattered his back and left doctors warning him that he would slowly lose all mobility, develop a deadly blood disorder, and die in agonizing decline. Unable to face a future of paralysis and hopelessness, he made a devastating decision. He drove out alone one night and took his own life, leaving his wife and daughters behind. Ronda has said the trauma never left her, and that her rage, toughness, and kill or be killed mentality in the cage were born from that loss. In 2014, a Ryanair flight issued 3 warnings telling passengers not to eat nuts because a 4-year-old girl on board had a life-threatening nut allergy. One passenger ignored them, opened a packet of nuts anyway, and the girl almost immediately went into anaphylactic shock. Her tongue swelled, she turned blue, and briefly lost consciousness as crew scrambled to inject adrenaline and prepare for an emergency landing, all because one idiotic passenger couldn't resist a snack. The girl barely survived, and the airline banned the selfish passenger for 2 years. 2005, Leo DiCaprio was attending a private party when an uninvited guest, 40-year-old Aretha Wilson, suddenly smashed a glass bottle and slashed him across the face and neck. She was reportedly drunk, furious, and believed DiCaprio was her ex-boyfriend, the same man who was hosting the party. The attack left Leo covered in blood, inches from having his jugular vein severed, and required 17 stitches to close the wounds. Instead of staying to face the consequences, Wilson fled the country and hid in Canada for 5 years. She was eventually extradited back to the US, where she pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. An incredibly light punishment considering she almost killed one of the most famous actors in the world over mistaken identity. Robert Lawrence Jr. made history in 1967 as America's first black astronaut, and he did it with unmatched skill. He held a PhD, was one of the Air Force's top test pilots, and was on track to become the first black man in space. At his first press conference, a reporter tried to joke by asking if he'd have to sit in the back of the spacecraft, and Lawrence shut it down with, "We're all officers, we all sit in the front." But less than a year later, his life was cut short during a high-speed training mission when another pilot misjudged a maneuver. Lawrence ejected, but his parachute failed to deploy properly, and he slammed into the ground, dying instantly at just 32 years old. The program was canceled soon after, and Robert Lawrence Jr.'s name was nearly lost to history. They thought she was just a sweet, innocent grandma, but behind her front door was pure horror. In the 1980s, California woman Dorothea Puente used her Sacramento boarding house as a hunting ground for the vulnerable. She took in the elderly, the homeless, alcoholics, and people with mental illness, those with monthly government checks and no family to worry about them. Once they trusted her, she allegedly drugged them with heavy sedatives, suffocated them in their sleep, and buried them in her backyard like garbage. Tenants began mysteriously disappearing, but Puente kept cashing their social security payments and forging signatures as if they were still alive. Neighbors complained of a foul stench and constant digging in her yard, but police believed her every time she claimed the tenants had simply moved out. In 1988, police finally searched her property and dug up body after body, unearthing 7 decomposing corpses hidden in shallow graves. Even then, Puente was so calm and grandmotherly that officers let her step outside to get coffee, and she fled the state. After a nationwide manhunt, she was caught and eventually linked to at least 9 murders, though many believe the real number was far higher. Kyle Marissa Roth blew up on TikTok for fearlessly exposing celebrity scandals using follower-submitted blind items. Despite her bold personality online, she was quietly battling serious health issues behind the scenes, reportedly suffering from chronic pain and illness that she never fully shared with her audience. But instead of letting it break her, she used it as fuel. Roth said that seeing other chronically ill people push through their struggles inspired her to keep making content. However, in April of 2024, she was suddenly found dead at just 36 years old, leaving millions of followers stunned and searching for answers. Even stranger, just days before she died, Roth had posted videos saying she was going through something but would explain soon. Her cause of death still hasn't publicly been released, but her family has asked for privacy and insisted that she was deeply loved. The woman who spent her life revealing secrets left the world with one of her own, but fans remember her not just for the drama she uncovered, but also for her humor, bravery, and the way she made people feel seen and entertained during their darkest days. This was the moment Diana Lovejoy collapsed in court after being found guilty of plotting to kill her ex-husband, Greg Mulvihill. Locked in a bitter custody battle over their young son, Lovejoy feared losing her boy and conspired with her firearms instructor, Weldon McDavid Jr., to eliminate Mulvihill. In 2016, she lured her ex-husband to a remote dirt road where McDavid ambushed him with a rifle. Shot in the torso, Mulvihill survived by playing dead and calling 911. Investigators traced the attack back to Lovejoy and McDavid, and both were convicted. She received 26 years to life, while he was sentenced to 50 years. Doctors across the world have documented shocking cases of patients arriving in the ER with objects lodged deep inside their bodies. But one of the strangest in history involved a 5-pound dumbbell. The patient arrived in agonizing pain but refused to explain how it got there, forcing surgeons to perform a delicate operation to extract it. Britain's most prolific executioner, Albert Pierrepoint, spent 25 years hanging up to 600 criminals, but it was only his side hustle. By day he ran a pub where locals drank with him, knowing full well he was also the hangman. In 1950, one of his own regulars, a man he nicknamed Tish, was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, and it was Pierrepoint himself who placed the noose around his neck and carried out the execution. This haunting photo shows an early radiation therapy session from the 1930s, when doctors used x-rays to burn away skin diseases or tumors with terrifyingly primitive equipment. The patient's head was clamped perfectly still so doctors could fire high-dose radiation at specific areas of the face. Because the dangers of radiation were barely understood, patients often suffered brutal side effects: severe burns, scarring, hair loss, blindness, and even cancer years later. In some cases, radiation was even used to treat acne or blemishes, causing far more damage than the condition itself. In May of 1973, a man walked into a bank in Ontario with a rifle and a bomb wired inside his own mouth. The device was connected to a dead man's switch, meaning if he released the pressure or was killed, it would immediately explode. He calmly took hostages and demanded money, claiming there was another larger bomb hidden inside the bank. When he tried to leave the building with a bag of cash, police snipers opened fire. The moment he was hit, the switch released, detonating the bomb in his mouth and blowing up his head and upper body in front of everyone. Investigators later found a second device inside the bank containing 200 sticks of dynamite that could have wiped out the entire building, but it was luckily defused. The man carried several fake IDs and was so badly mutilated that he's never been identified. Julie Andrews had one of the most iconic voices in Hollywood history, but one botched surgery destroyed it forever. Known for Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music, her flawless 4-octane soprano was considered untouchable. But in 1997, a simple procedure to remove harmless nodules went horribly wrong. Surgeons permanently mutilated her vocal cords, leaving her in agonizing pain just to speak. Andrews later sued the hospital and won, but no lawsuit could undo the damage, as the world's most beloved singing voice was silenced forever. This NASA scientist helped land humans on the moon, but his rockets were first built with slave labor in Nazi death camps. Wernher von Braun, the celebrated architect of the Apollo missions, once ran the V-2 rocket program for Adolf Hitler. The rockets were manufactured using prisoners from the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp, who were typically starved, beaten, and worked until they died. Conditions were so brutal that over 20,000 prisoners were killed while making the rockets, far more than the rockets ever killed in combat. But after the war, von Braun wasn't punished. Instead, the US secretly brought him to America under Operation Paperclip, erased most of his Nazi past, and turned him into a national hero. A shocking medical scandal is unfolding in Austria, where a neurosurgeon is facing criminal charges for allegedly letting her 12-year-old daughter drill a hole into a patient's skull during emergency brain surgery. The unconscious patient had suffered traumatic head injuries and needed a burr hole to relieve pressure, yet prosecutors say the surgeon handed the drill to her daughter and let her perform the procedure herself, despite the child having zero medical training. The girl never should have been inside the operating room in the first place, as strict hospital protocol forbids minors or unauthorized personnel from being present during sterile surgeries, let alone touching the equipment, let alone drilling into patients' skulls. The patient was never informed a child would be involved, and only discovered the truth months later after an anonymous tip led to an investigation. The hospital immediately fired the surgeons involved, and the lead doctor is now on trial for causing bodily harm and abusing her position. Although the patient survived, he reportedly still suffers long-term effects, and the court called the doctor's decision a catastrophic breach of trust and professionalism. MF Doom, the masked supervillain of hip-hop, died in a way just as mysterious as the persona he created. On Halloween Day in 2020, he passed away at 49, but his death was kept completely secret for 62 days. For 2 months, fans continued listening to his music and waiting for new projects, unaware that he was already gone. Then on New Year's Eve, his wife quietly announced his passing, but gave no cause of death or any further details. To this day, the circumstances remain undisclosed, sparking endless speculation. It felt strangely fitting. Doom built his entire identity around mystery and anonymity, sometimes even sending imposters to perform in his place. In the end, he died on Halloween, vanished in silence, and left behind one final mystery. In 1929, 6-year-old Carl Newton Mahan became the youngest person in American history to be charged with murder, then sat in a courtroom playing with a doll. The Kentucky boy had gotten into a fight with an 8-year-old named Cecil Van Hoos over a piece of scrap metal. Cecil reportedly slapped him, so Carl ran home, grabbed his father's shotgun, and blasted the older boy, killing him instantly. Because of the shocking nature of the crime, Carl was actually put on trial for murder, sitting in the courtroom so young that they had to give him toys to keep him calm. The jury found him guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 15 years in reform school, but the conviction was quickly overturned due to public outrage. While on his way to Toronto to film the second season of Gen V in March of 2024, actor Chance Perdomo tragically died in a single-vehicle motorcycle crash at just 27 years old. Authorities confirmed no other vehicles were involved, but never released the exact location, cause of the crash, weather condition, or road details, leaving the true circumstances unknown. Because he died alone, there were no public witnesses and no full incident report, sparking endless speculation among fans. Eerily, just days before the accident, he posted a photo of his motorcycle on Instagram, with the ominous caption, "The final calm before the storm." His death impacted Gen V so heavily that production was postponed, and instead of recasting his character, the writers rewrote the entire season around his absence, a rare move that shows just how important and irreplaceable he was as an actor. In 1996, a stray mother cat in New York City became famous for performing one of the most heroic acts in animal rescue history. When the abandoned garage she and her newborn kittens were living in caught fire, she ran through the flames 5 separate times, carrying each kitten out one by one. By the time she saved the last one, her eyes were blistered shut, her ears and paws were burned, and her fur was scorched. But she touched each kitten with her nose to make sure they were all alive before collapsing unconscious. Nicknamed Scarlet, she later recovered at a veterinary hospital and was reunited with her kittens, all of whom survived. The story went viral worldwide, and the mother cat and all 5 of her babies were eventually adopted into loving homes. In 2022, 39-year-old Stephen Dierkes was working at Caterpillar's foundry in Illinois when he suddenly slipped and fell into a large vat of molten iron heated to 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The human body has zero chance at that temperature as he was vaporized instantly. A coworker said part of his body was still on the platform while the rest of it melted like candle wax. OSHA later found several severe safety violations, but nothing could undo one of the most horrific workplace deaths in history. Kazuko Fukuda, dubbed the Woman of 7 Faces, strangled a coworker in 1982 and disappeared, launching one of Japan's longest manhunts in history. But instead of hiding, she reinvented herself over and over, using fake identities, constant moves, and even plastic surgery to change her face. She stayed free for nearly 15 years, long enough that Japan's statute of limitations on murder was about to expire. But just months before time ran out, a diner owner recognized her from a TV show, and police confirmed her identity using fingerprints on a beer bottle. She was finally sentenced to life in 1999, but